and offer them more than just a few immigration schemes, Mr. Speaker.
For the Honourable Marianne Street.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Kia ora koutou katoa, tēnei te mihi nui ki a koutou. It's a very great pleasure to stand and speak in the Parliament on this historic occasion. This is a unique event, and I hope it will not be the last one of its kind. I was a member of the Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Select Committee at the time that we did our report into the relationship between New Zealand and our Pacific neighbours. And I want to recognise John Hayes and his work as chair of that committee. And yes, there might have been all that bulldozing and bullying and stuff that went on, but the result was good and it was very well worth it. And so I do acknowledge him and other members of the Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Select Committee at that time. And we are now beginning to reap the benefits of that report. And this is one of those moments that has come out of that report. Mr. Speaker, I recently had the great good fortune and the great honour of visiting Solomon Islands. My colleague, Dr. Cam Calder, and I visited Solomon Islands to talk with members of Parliament there about the implementation of a report, again, another report, but it came out of an open forum held last year on Pacific adolescent sexual reproduction and health rights. And that report had a number of recommendations in it, and one of them was that members of the New Zealand Parliamentarians for Population Development Group, which is a cross-party group, go and talk with members of Parliament around the Pacific, because this was a Pacific report. People had come from Tuvalu, from Papua New Guinea, from Kiribati, from around the Pacific to contribute to that open forum. And we heard from members of Parliament, but we also heard at that time from NGOs and those non-governmental organisations who work in the area of sexual and reproductive health and rights, particularly with young people. And so I was able at that time not only to advance that agenda that came out of that combined report with Dr. Cam Calder from the National Party, but also had the privilege of visiting the part just out of Honiara, which is called New Zealand Camp, and saw the places where my father served as a member of the New Zealand Air Force in World War II. My father never talked about that experience very much. He was one of that generation who didn't discuss what happened in the war much. But I remember very well having Solomon Island visitors come to our house in not a steady stream, but visitors who arrived at our house in New Plymouth for years and years and years after, because my father had known their fathers. My father had known their parents, their families, through his posting to Solomon Islands at that time. And it was a very moving moment for me, and I want to acknowledge the contribution that jointly Solomon Islands and New Zealand forces played at that time. Mr. Speaker, my particular brief is around overseas development assistance, and I have that responsibility in shadow terms as Associate Foreign Affairs. I have always been concerned about our ability to assist our Pacific neighbours to achieve the Millennium Development Goals. We have not engaged sufficiently, I think, in the achievement of those goals. I hope in the course of these few days that we will be able to discuss such things as overseas development assistance, so that we understand exactly what the needs are, so that this is not seen as the distribution of largesse from a country that's better off, but an engagement in partnership to ensure that the peoples of the Pacific are educated, are healthy, are well equipped to make their own decisions for their own futures. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call Jan Logie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And